Hello, everyone. We are going to continue with the track 3 now, and I can introduce to you Dr. Frederico Magalhaes. He will present on Psilocybin-Assisted therapy for Anorexia Nervosa, Therapeutic considerations from the Panorexia trial. He's a psychiatrist and psychedelic guide, and he focuses on the potential of clinical applications of psychedelics. He's currently an NHS consultant psychiatrist and collaborates with the Oxford Ketamine Clinic and is a research fellow at the Imperial Center for Psychedelic Research. And I'm looking forward to your talk, so you can go ahead.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, so it's nice to see you all here today. I'm Frederico, and I was a doctor and guide on Panorexia, which is a study of psilocybin for anorexia at Imperial College. I planned to be here today with Jen Danby, who's the lead therapist for our trial and an expert in anorexia, but Jen could not join us today, so please bear with me. We submitted that we might present on some psychotherapeutic aspects of the study. There are many published articles and books on the psychedelic therapy process and increasing amounts of outcome data, but not so much recent information available about the actual experiences of conducting psychedelic therapy with clinical populations. The presentation is not systematic or quantitative or qualitative, analytic. It's a loose collection of some observations and ideas, which I hope you might find interesting. I'll tell you a little bit about the study details, but only very briefly, as it will be covered at the results presentation here at Insight, so keep an eye out for that. To begin with, some basic information about the study. It was run out of the clinical research facility at Hammersmith Hospital and aimed to enroll and treat up to 21 patients with anorexia to assess safety and efficacy of this treatment. Here we have some inclusion and exclusion criteria, which I'll let you capture for yourselves. And I'll just point out that due to concerns about medical frailty, we'd had a criteria that patients be open to an NHS eating disorders team, so a National Health Service team, and have a designated support person who we worked with closely over the course of the trial. So essentially, this was the design of the study. Following the screening and enrollment, the participants were attributed a guide pair, and the participants had 3 doses of psilocybin with psychological support, following the common model of preparation, dosing, and integration over 3 days. And you can see we had some initial remote preparation with guides prior to the start of the trial, and an integration calls with guides in the weeks following the doses, which I've marked there with a blue star. And then a final visit with a final integration session 2 weeks after the 3rd dose. And patients had 1 low dose and 2 high doses, and they were blinded to the doses, but they knew they would receive at least 1 high dose. Before we talk about the work on the trial, here's some brief theory on anorexia. So the DSM manual sets it out as 1, a disturbance of how one's weight and shape are experienced, 2, an intense fear of gaining weight, and 3, a restriction of energy intake, leading to significantly low weight. In terms of psychopathology, I've included 2 models here that cover quite a lot of ground. Fairbairn and colleagues developed a CBT model of anorexia, which frames it as a dysfunctional system for evaluating self-worth. So whereas other people might evaluate their self-worth in terms of their relationships, their work, their interests, people with anorexia monitor their worth in terms of their weight and how good they are at controlling their diet. As part of this complex, he also highlighted low self-esteem, perfectionism, intolerance of mood states, negative and positive, and interpersonal difficulties. From a more psychoanalytic perspective, we have the work of Hilde Bruch, who proposed anorexia as a maladaptive search for selfhood and a self-respecting identity. As you might expect, she highlights difficulties with early relationships, such as insecure attachments. And from there, difficulties with developing selfhood and individuation or separation. Anorexia is a way to gain a sense of control over the environment. Difficulties with emotional apperception, expression, and regulation. And disturbed body perception, a difficulty in recognizing and understanding signals from the body. Ambivalence about recovery is a very important feature of anorexia, often described as an ego-syntonic condition. We have here some quotes from someone with anorexia. Who would I be without it when I have lived my entire life, building my sense of self, while also having it there? What is life without it? That is my big black hole that puts me off going further in any kind of recovery. This is actually from a public and patient involvement initiative that we ran prior to the start of the trial with 2 focus groups, in which one of the main themes discussed was recovery. Ambivalence about recovery is an important part of what makes anorexia difficult to treat. We know that somewhere between 50 to 7% of treatments are ended prematurely, and for 1/3 of patients, it's a lifelong condition. I'm going to share a bit now about our therapeutic approach. And the basic structure of what we did, the psychological support, was articulated back in 2008 by the group at Johns Hopkins, including Bill Richards, who was involved in the launch of our trial. And it sets out guidance on issues like screening, physical environment, and the personnel. In terms of the therapeutic process, the basic tenets are there, by which we mean preparation, dosing, and integration. In preparation, the priority is on developing rapport and trust with the patient and informing the participant and preparing for the experience. In dosing, it encourages an essentially non-directive supportive process and providing reassurance when necessary. And in the post-session, and many papers hesitate to use the word integration, is a space for the participant to discuss their experience. Interestingly, there's no suggestion of any particular psychotherapeutic framework at this point. Of course, in the meantime, a lot has happened. Different models have been put forward by psychedelic-assisted therapy. I know Max Wolf covered that in great detail. Interestingly, most clinical trials still do not report on their specific model. I'm going to summarize some of the ideas that informed our approach around a core of psychological support. So like I said, our lead therapist, Jen, is a specialist in emotion-focused family therapy. And that works with a core tenet of emotional training, and we're working closely with families to help them attend to and validate emotions. And it was also especially relevant in working closely with our support persons. Our therapeutic approach was strongly influenced by our supervisor, Tim Reed, who articulated the depth relational process anchored in the development of presence with the patient, and in itself informed by systems of knowledge, psychodynamic, trauma-informed, transpersonal, somatic, and indigenous. There are elements from traditional or underground work which informed a lot of the psychological support model to begin with, such as setting an intention or the use of grounding objects, and then also the idea of the inner healer, which we hold in mind but did not necessarily share with the participants in so many words. And I've added here a knowledge of anorexia, the lived illness and its treatment, the day-to-day. I think although we might see psychedelic therapy as a trans-diagnostic model, there's something to be said for this deep knowledge of the illness. And also we were aware of other models, such as I've put there on the side, such as ACE, developed at Imperial, CBT, internal family systems, and compassion-focused therapy. Okay, so that's some of the theory. And in this part, I'll be talking about the participant journey, which included these 5 stages, which we'll go through. This is screening, quite comprehensive, and we gathered a lot of information, quite a lot of time with the patient. And I'm not going to say too much about it now, but I think the therapeutic journey kind of really started here. And there's quite a lot to be said for screening and recruitment, quite challenging parts of our trial. Moving on to remote preparation, as we've seen, the essential priority is to establish a trusting relationship with the participant and trust in the guides and the medicine and the process. Alongside this, there's a need for careful and thoughtful preparation for the experience, including elements such as psychoeducation and psychedelic experience, instructions for navigating the terrain, and setting expectations and intentions. Here we had to hold 2 ideas in mind. On the one hand, the need to convey all the information, the important information, ensure it was understood. On the other hand, it felt important to show that we were not too stuck to an agenda, because a patient group that really strives for perfectionism, and we can model a relaxed attitude, not attaching too much to ideas of doing right or wrong. So it's easier said than done. For example, I remember one patient said, "I'm trying not to think about it in terms of right or wrong, but I think I'm doing that wrong." It's important to allow space for us to get to know the participant, to listen to what they feel is important, show that we're listening, make connections. And we also discussed preparing the ending right from the start, because our time together will be intense and be over quickly, and that can be difficult. Our focus groups, so thinking about the practical roadmap, our focus groups highlighted the importance of people knowing the details of the study, going into it, to reduce anxiety around it, so they could clear their minds for the work. And we developed a little booklet with issues such as accommodation, meal planning, that we could go through together, and left plenty of space for questions, which were often about food and food preparation, but also other issues. And that kind of helped, I think, settle things, a lot of questions. We discussed the issue of knowing the doses, so the patients were blind to the doses, we knew them, and it caused a bit of an imbalance. How do we work with that, with that mystery or that uncertainty? I'll discuss that later if we have time. And we also completed some study measures, which weren't always helpful therapeutically. Well, we wouldn't do them if it was just a therapy. And so there's some tension there with the research that we can discuss later. And finally, in prep, we had a breathing practice, just 2 or 3 minutes, focusing on the present moment, a sense of presence that the participant could practice at home. It's important at the end of each prep session to debrief with your co-guide, develop some hypotheses. How are we feeling about this? How's the patient feeling? Any thoughts on what might come up in the sessions? The next step is coming to in-person prep the day before the first dose. And it's very important, again, for the patient to know the space, the room, the guides, physical presence, where we sit, the headphones and the eye mask, what it all feels like. And by reducing this uncertainty, we reduce the anxieties that might be there, all the way up until dosing. And we're finally there together. The door is closed and the music is on. And outside is a modern clinical research facility. But in the room, we're really kind of away from the world. And again, some study measures. And then we settle in with our breathing exercise. And the time, again, is for going over the journey ahead, addressing anxieties, challenges, and anticipating challenges, and how we might approach them. Important to recognize that people with anorexia have a difficulty in asking for support, often. And so we often thought together about this. How will we know if you need us? Can you ask us for support? And we rehearsed the use of comforting touch. We set intentions for the dose. Without a formal analysis, I would say that more often than not, there were questions, which maybe reflects where they are on the recovery journey. The intention isn't, I want to get better. The intention is, why can't I get better? How can I get better? And as guides, we start to become more aware of how we're feeling about the dose ahead and of how the patient's effect on us. And all this is important information. The use of guided meditations in PrEP has been a feature of different psychedelic treatment trials. I know some groups use a stream with the metaphor of the turbulence and the peaceful and letting yourself go. And with the depression trial, we used this ACE model, diving into the depths, finding the wisdom, and coming up to reconnect with the world. In our trial, we're aware of the anorexic tendency, again, for perfectionism and pleasing others. And we felt that anything too narrative might be directive, and the patients would become preoccupied with doing it right, like following the trajectory. And so aware of that, and aware of their difficulty in perceiving and tolerating emotion, we came across this poem by Jeff Foster, which runs through difficult emotions and how they're experienced and how they might be processed and transformed. The poem is read by the guides, and the participants might close their eyes and kind of try and touch in with the feeling state and be better prepared for the emotional elements of the work, hopefully. It models, the poem models the full experiencing of emotion as the way through it, which is important in the psychedelic experience. And there's also quite a somatic element to it, in orienting people to their internal experience. So moving on to dosing day, we settle the patient in, again, the breathing exercise and the dose of medicine, and some time talking or painting or drawing. And then we would support the journey inward with the eye mask and the music. Following the general model we discussed, we'd have as a base a generally supportive presence and awareness. We respond when the patient asks for support, or when we sense they might be in need of support, or when there might be a dynamic of distraction. We might try to gently guide them back in. There is a sense in there that an attentive presence has a therapeutic value in itself on many different levels. And in terms of our therapeutic models, we bring our knowledge with us, but we do not engage in therapy as such. Our theories are still there. So if someone says, the anorexia was keeping me safe, we recognize to ourselves, okay, there is a part. Or if someone is saying, or if a participant is more closed off to one of the guides, we think, okay, maybe there's a relational process going on here. Or if we're feeling kind of left out. I'm reminded of the idea from Jung, know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. I cannot emphasize enough, this is hard work. Emotionally, intellectually, physically demanding for patients and guides. It makes us question and confront ourselves. It finds our sensitive spots, and it brings relational issues to the fore. Moving into the ascent phase, this patient group in particular, so cut off from their bodies, so dependent, and their emotions, so dependent on their powerful cognitive ability to keep the world in order. As Carl Desseroth has said, a frontal lobe so powerful that it can hijack the most basic life instinct to eat. And when the medicine starts to work, disorganizing that cognitive machine, summoning emotion, the body is starting to make itself known. That could be really challenging, an enormous potential there for overwhelm, or its alternative, distraction. So the ascent phase could be quite turbulent. In the plateau stage, we ran the full gamut of human experiences: intense loneliness, sadness and despair, confusion and ambivalence, physical discomfort and anger against us or against themselves, and so often shame. Sometimes events like ego dissolution, formlessness, joy, a sense of fun and excitement, which can also be challenging in its own way. And then in the return stage, sometimes disappointment, regret, resistance, perplexity, confrontation with reality, anger, and then also relief, motivation, pride, and peace as well, sometimes. And it was hard work. Towards the end of the day, we have a meal together, which could be very interesting and important. And then when ready, we handed over the participants to the care of their support person. The following morning, we'll talk a little bit about integration. And the following morning, we came in with an open stance, giving the participant as much space as necessary to share their experience in whatever way they felt most relevant, without needing to make meaning, allowing space for not knowing, the possibility that things can take time to make sense. Time again for holding our models at the back of our mind, having a soft touch, supporting participants to distill, establishing some connections. And if some values or promise or intent arises, we could prompt, how would that translate into your life? Here, the specific anorexia expertise could be important for many reasons, in part because a lot of the desired change was around food and meals, and we can support them with their plans or goals. At the same time, as is often the case, we encourage the registration of the experience, and we had a little integration booklet with some prompts. No expectation that it be completed or filled, just some ideas. And to help see the process of integration, we had the idea of offering an object, one pebble for each dosing session. These were sent to us by a poet, Dean Wilson, and they were often chosen at random, and it was interesting how the pebble could reflect often some experience of the dose. The inside is so different from the outside, or one side is smooth and the other is rough. There were some challenges in integration in the days and weeks following the doses. Pending a more formal analysis, I'll mention a few things. Sometimes a sense of contraction, that experience had been meaningful and important, but the participants feeling themselves closing up, once back in their lives. The insights not seeming as relevant, the hope less bright. Others finding difficulties in making the changes they had hoped for. And so some feelings of dejection. In this regard, anorexia might pose a different challenge to, say, anxiety or depression, in the sense that the measure of progress is quite immediate and objective. I know, am I eating? Am I exercising? At the same time, some participants articulated the need to maintain the anorexia behavior stable whilst they navigated raw feelings or unexpected insights, or sought to develop neglected areas of their lives. In this way, the anorexic structure has a safe, stable base for new exploration and possibilities, which might then in turn allow for a revision of that very structure. There was often anxiety and uncertainty. Did I do it right? Why didn't it work? What if the next dose is the same? What if everyone is disappointed in me? And life events during the trial brought unhelpful distractions, opportunities for change, or magnification of processes. One participant who had a particularly marked experience of the frailty of life just missed a transport, a train or a bus a few days later that had a quite serious accident. So you can see how those ideas can be perpetuated in ways we can't expect or reinforced. Other participants lost loved ones. Some went straight back into difficult work environments, home moves, large family events, or met with NHS clinicians who were working to different models. And as is common theme to most therapies, any progress in an individual often means a destabilization of relationship patterns. And psychedelics can seem to develop this more acutely. So there are often relationship challenges to navigate. These are just some of the challenges and themes. And so finally, to touch on some specific issues, I'll just talk about some themes that came up. Connection to loved ones were invariably present. Themes of love, gratitude, anger, grief, challenges to idealization, the possibility of forgiveness, reappraisals of the past, such as recovered memories, traumas, and past treatments. Often a confrontation with their life around the start of the anorexia, their emotional states at the time. And from that point, sometimes a sense of anorexia as a necessary protective factor at some stage in their life at that stage. And sometimes a gratitude for that protection and the possibility of letting go. And also often a sense of the possibilities of life without anorexia, all the promise a life can hold, tempered by a realization of the challenges that a different life might pose. How does a person without anorexia choose a meal? How do they know how much to eat? What is the alternative to being in control? Is it being completely out of control? And for some, strong maternal instincts, waking with substantial force. Interestingly, we rarely had an experience of the spiritual or mystical, and that perhaps reflects the levels of kind of repressed emotion and bodily work to be done before reaching those levels, according to a Groffian model. So there's another relationship in the psychedelic work that appears especially important, and the relationship between the two guides, the therapeutic dyad. Working therapeutic with patients, we can often be aware of their effect on us, which can be understood in terms of process of transference, counter-transference, projection, and so on. And these are complex and interesting enough in any environment. But what if instead of one therapist, we are two therapists? Something might approximate a parental dyad. What if the work is inspiring vulnerability and regression, asking someone to lie down in a bed, covering them with blankets, caring for them, whilst using substances that are proposed to magnify or accelerate emotional processes? And when we feel strong emotions in those moments, how do we know what is ours, what is the patient's, what is the therapist's? And what if we disagree about how to approach them? And how can we discuss these things? And can we disagree in front of the patient? Can we disagree after the patient is gone? Here we have a diagram that sets out this tripartite relationship and some of the factors that might be relevant, such as our personal characteristics and the dynamics in the research, our family or religious or spiritual backgrounds. So it's a really complex system. Okay, I'm sort of running out of time, but I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say. I'll just say something about food, if that's okay. So obviously an important part of the trial, in many different ways sometimes that we didn't expect. For example, we checked blood sugars in the morning before the dose. Sometimes they were low, and we had to encourage the patient to have something to eat, like some cashew nuts or a big cookie, something to get them through the day. And you could see how that brought up a lot for the patients immediately. It was like a bad trip before the trip even started. But it was also an opportunity often for us to go through something together at the start. And the patients often afterwards, they said, this was the start of the work. I'm proud of what I did. An opportunity for rupture and repair. And then also a little bit about the meal at the end of the day, if that's okay. It was a very important experience, often an opportunity for patients to connect with, sometimes with foods that they hadn't had for a long time, connect with things from their childhood. They brought things that they thought they might enjoy, and it could often be quite moving. One participant reported a feeling of like the nourishment flowing through her, like a golden light. Or I remember one phrase which was, "Peanut butter has healed my heart." There was a lot of things like that, but sometimes, so there was that, and then on the other side, sometimes it was a re-encounter with reality, really difficult. Here it is again. This is the difficulty, or reenactment of past traumas, say on inpatient wards, and a real sadness there. And for others, this realization, kind of between the two, that okay, it's not a magic pill. This is the work. I'm going to have to eat, and it's going to be difficult, but this is the way through. So a bit on low-dose experiences and tensions between therapy and research, if anyone wanted to ask questions. And I'll leave my conclusions up there because I think we need to have some time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Federico, for your very valuable and insightful and important talk on this topic and sharing your personal experience with us. Now we have time for a few questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you. So you briefly mentioned the ending at the beginning, and do you have anything to say about that? How it was for the patients to end, and did you have to follow up with some of them because that was too hard?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. It's a really good one. I think speaking to the ending, again, I think one of the factors is that how quickly we develop the relationship, how deep we go, and then how quickly we end. And the other element is that these experiences, as we know, they're ineffable, they're difficult to describe, and the very fact that we witnessed it, but we're not going to be there anymore, that was really, I think, difficult. We did our best, like I said, to start early, start thinking about it early. What does this bring up? We tried to mark the ending, again, maybe with a printed copy of the poem, with the pebbles, with things that people could take with them that were kind of material. And then if things were still kind of open after that, if things didn't feel really closed, if the participants were having difficulties, there were opportunities for integration, not with our team, but we had a list of potential integration therapists that they could continue the work with. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I have actually a medical question. So regarding the condition itself of anorexia and the associated comorbidities, what was guiding your dose adjustment for the patient, and which things were the main stuff you took into account?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think that we saw something earlier today in the first presentation, that for psilocybin, we don't really make dose adjustments on weight. There's a dose, that's considered a high dose, and that's the dose that's used in most trials, regardless of the weight.
Not just the weight, but generally the other comorbidities that this condition sometimes bring with it, whether it's, I know you excluded patients with like medical instability,
Yeah.
but it could be quite a gray area.
Yeah. Yeah, so we did a physical check before to make sure there was, a sufficient robustness in the person, an ECG, blood tests, so that there was some space there for a strong experience, and that gave us confidence that we could give a high dose. And there was also evidence from previous trials and that it was safe enough. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. I have two questions. The first one is, what was your intentionality behind using the word guide instead of therapist? And did you also use it in contact with the patients? And did you collect any data about behavioral changes after the sessions regarding different methods of regulating the anxiety coming with the loss of control that were not eating less?
Mm. Yeah, so so in terms of the wording, I think we used the word. I used it quite interchangeably. I think we used the word guides in the trial and in the study. And I think from the start we set a sense of kind of a horizontal structure where it's not this dyad of expert and non-expert. Sometimes, very often, they are the expert. They are in the experience. They are they could be like the baby, but they could also be like the guru in that situation. So from the start, it's very much alongside rather than we're treating you. And so we established that from the beginning. And guide seems like a good word, I think, to reflect that. In terms of the outcome measures, we used quite a lot. I think that we'll present them at the results presentation in a more kind of scientific or structured way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, in terms of time, we have to continue. And thank you again for your valuable talk.